Hello and welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy. Today, our guest is Ruth Rathblott. She is an award-winning CEO of multiple nonprofit organizations. She's won awards from the New York Times, multiple other awards across the spectrum, and recognitions for her work in leading in the topic of diversity. It's a very widely discussed topic these days, but Ruth has a little bit of a different perspective on it, and it's a very important perspective, which leads us into her passion project. Ruth, welcome.
Thank you, Cords. I'm glad to be here.
We're very excited to talk with you. You know, diversity is a topic that is extremely polarizing. It's one of those things that can be really challenging to talk about, but I have a feeling we're going to have a really productive conversation today about what you're up to.
I know we are. And you're right. It can be polarizing, and it so doesn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I 100% agree with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you're an expert on it.
Sure. So I have been, as you mentioned, a leader in the nonprofit space for over 25 years and really focused on providing opportunities and access to young people, whether it be through my work at Big Brothers Big Sisters for 15 years, exposing kids to the workplace and to corporate America, then to my work running an organization that focused on getting students to and through college. And so I understand that perspective of access and opportunity. And it's interesting, about a few years ago, I was in a conversation at my workplace and I was questioned about the leadership of my team and how diverse it was. And I went through my process of hiring and recruiting team members and retaining them. And at the end of the conversation, I asked, "Do you see me as diverse?" And the answer back was kind of a sheepish, "Well, you're a woman." And I recognize that that's absolutely a lens of diversity, gender.
Sure. I've seen the checkbox.
Yeah, I've seen the checkbox. And I then questioned it a little bit further and I said, "Well, what about my limb difference?" Because I was born, Cords, with a limb difference. I was born missing my left hand. And the answer back to that was a little bit shocking. It was, "Oh, I don't see you like that." And it made me pause because I had spent 25 years of my life hiding my hand and made a decision a number of years ago to stop hiding it physically. But what I realized after that conversation was maybe I was still hiding because I wasn't sharing my journey of being someone with a limb difference and the challenges I had, the obstacles I overcame, just as a person with the lived experience of disability, of a physical disability. And what's amazing is I started reaching out to corporate contacts because I'd been on panels around gender and race. And I started realizing that the topic of difference around disability for visible or invisible wasn't part of the agenda. And so I started sharing in my story. I was invited in by several corporations to start sharing my journey and have found really amazing things from that. So that's kind of what makes me an expert, is sharing my journey of hiding, sharing my journey of unhiding and acceptance. And then how do I show up authentically? Where do I still struggle? Because so many of us hide parts of ourselves.
Well, in my opinion, I think that it's understanding those perspectives is really the point of it all, the point of diversity, and your journey and what you've been through and how you've grown from it, and your unique perspective. Maybe you could share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, it's absolutely what you just touched on, which is different perspectives, right? Because when I think about, oftentimes when we think about the teams that we manage or the people that we work with, we like having similar ideas, right? So it's the idea of, oh, well, this is how we're going to work on the project. This is how we're going to accomplish it. This is the performance and the productivity. As managers, we think about that all the time. And we forget a little bit about people, right? What are they coming into the workplace with or to the organization with? And also, what have been their lived experiences around perspective? So as someone with a limb difference, I know that I have spent a lot of time and a lot of my life worrying and forecasting next steps constantly. Like, how am I going to accomplish this? How am I going to do this? That most people will never see the behind the scenes thinking of that. And so when I think about the teams that I like to supervise and who I want on my team, they are people who have overcome challenges, or who have a different perspective, who think outside the box and are creative. And I would even add, are self-aware, that know that that's part of their journey, because that's what makes the work interesting. It's also what adds depth and perspective to projects.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you just mentioned thinking multiple steps ahead. That sounds like a good quality for a position, let's say a CEO.
Well, it's a necessary position. That's an understatement. It's a
Right.
necessary position, because yeah, you have to be thinking about, you don't get the advantage of just thinking about the trees as a CEO. You're always thinking about the forest. Like, you have to think about the tree and the forest and the tree and the forest. And so you always have to be thinking a few steps ahead. What is the decision I'm making today? What's going to be the effect of that decision, or the result of that decision, on employees, on clients, on customers, on funders? So yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a handy tool to have.
And so was it that in that meeting where they were acting like you didn't have a difference? Was that the moment that you decided to focus on that as your passion project?
Yeah, I started to be really curious about it. Like, why wasn't I seeing myself included on panels around diversity? Why wasn't it important that my limb difference mattered? And why wasn't it, I guess the other curiosity piece is, how big is this spectrum of people with disabilities? And I started to research it. I started to have conversations, and the more I got into it, the more I wanted to keep talking about it, because it is still, as you and I talked about, it can be polarizing, right? The idea of diversity. And so if we add this extra lens of disability, how can we shape the conversation so that more people feel included in those conversations around diversity?
Well, I can tell you one of the, just to share a little bit of a story from myself, one of the most proud moments that I ever had with the agency that I run here at Bake More Pies was supporting the Warrior Games. I don't know if you've heard the Warrior Games. It's a thing that the military does where they actually, you'd love it. Basically what they do is they highlight all of these athletes who may have lost a limb or have gone through severe trauma, or in some other way, whether it's physical or mental, some sort of a disability, but they get together every year and they compete in Olympics style games. And it was amazing. We got the opportunity to put together a video when it was here in Tampa for the opening of the games. And it was really, really, really inspiring. And it was just really very cool and inspiring to be around all of these athletes and all of this adversity that all of these individuals had overcome, and the camaraderie, and how it was really helping to build this shared common experience. And it wasn't just the United States military, it was all of our allies everywhere from Europe to Canada and down to South and Central America. And it was really quite powerful because, you've got this group of people that all of them, none of them were born that way, right? But they are just like you, dealing with that every single day. And so
Yeah.
I think, one of the points you made before our show is that the type of diversity that you are faced with every day is something that could happen at any time. It could happen to any one of us.
Disability is truly the great equalizer. It does
Mhm.
not discriminate based on race. It doesn't discriminate based on age, gender. It doesn't discriminate across socioeconomic lines. You could become disabled at any point of your life. And I think while that is a little bit fearful for people, I think it's also reality, because what's interesting is, this is what prompted me also to think about expanding the definition of diversity, is it is the largest minority group out there. So it's truly does not discriminate. And so when you think about those who have served our country and served other countries, and how amazing that is, and we salute you, it's also, so what are the effects of that? And how do we include you then in those conversations after, so that you feel part of the conversation that is such a hot topic right now around diversity, and not left out and saying, well, all right, you lost a limb and you served our country, thank you, but you're actually not part of this conversation. No, you are part of this conversation because you have a field of experience. You've had to overcome something. You've been challenged by something. And so, yeah, I take the opportunity to just what you're saying, to celebrate disability rather than saying it's a shame word or it's a, not to be proud of it. I'm super proud of my disability. It took me a while to get there though, because I had to understand it for myself first. And I had to go through a process and a journey of acceptance.
Totally. I totally understand where you're coming from. And I think really what we're talking about here is true diversity. It's true diversity of ideas, of lived experiences, of perspectives. And as someone who's in the business of creating messaging and brands and and understanding audiences is who I'm talking to, I want different perspectives. I want to understand where people are coming from, because my job is I'm a communicator at scale. And so I want to make sure I'm effectively communicating to as many people as possibly effectively.
Absolutely. And I think that's what all businesses want to do, right? I mean, if your goal is to succeed in business, your goal then is about bringing people in, right?
Sure.
But not shutting them out. And so and that starts with the team that you create initially. It starts with you first as a person, owning those parts. I talk often, Courts, about the idea around diversity and inclusion has to start with you and your own understanding of what you bring to the table, where you've been challenged, where you've had difference or held shame, right? Because there's a whole piece around that too. Like, where have you hidden your lives or wish something had been different? And then taking that message forward and listening and learning about others. I know for me, when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, now almost 2 summers ago, a year and a half ago, I needed to do some real work on learning first myself, and then listening, because it wasn't up to others to teach me. It was about me learning myself. And I say the same thing about disability. It's not my job to teach you about disability, but if you're interested in learning, listen to my experience. And learn about it, learn the history, learn that the fact that the ADA was only signed 31 years ago in my lifetime, that's a short time. And so and we still have work to do. So it's absolutely about that. And then to your point around your company, who is represented? Who's at the table with you making decisions? Who has the voice? And what are the external voices that need to be at the table? Who's not represented? Who doesn't have the power? And then thinking about how you recruit for your team is critical, because then you see kind of what's not there, what's missing.
Totally agree. And so someone with your background, I mean, I will listen to anybody's perspective, may or not agree with them, but I definitely want to understand their perspective. I mean, it's my job to understand that, and to motivate people and to lead them, or to follow someone else. I mean, I'm game. Like, I just want to understand what the field looks like. So as it relates to sort of like understand the field and like what you're dealing with, how do you, as someone who has the life experience as having a limb difference, how do you prefer people recognize it, address it, treat you? What do you want?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, it's part story, part direct, which is this past summer, I was in Belize and I tried my hand at zip lining. And for you, I think we talked a little bit about this before, zip lining is one of those things where they harness you up. And one of the key pieces that's important is this idea of you get harnessed up and then you're attached to a line and you need gloves. And I remember a friend telling me who had gone zip lining in Costa Rica a few years ago, make sure when you go zip lining, you get the good gloves with the solid padding on the palm. And so I knew I needed the gloves, and I was on this tour cords and I looked around and everybody else had these orange gloves and I didn't. And so I called the guide over thinking, obviously I was kind of last harnessed up. So I probably just forgot about the gloves. And he said to me, oh, well, you won't need them. And we're just going to buddy you up on the back of someone. And there was no way I was going to be buddied up with anyone. I came for the same experience. I water ski, I kayak. And I said, no way. I want the same experience. And luckily, another guide overheard us and came over immediately and said, oh, well, don't worry about it. He said, you only need one hand to zip line, and that's to pull down to break, and you'll be fine. And he handed me the orange gloves. And what was interesting, and I know that the first guide didn't do it to be mean, but what he did is he made an assumption about my ability rather than asking me and giving me kind of the play-by-play of how it would be. He didn't give me the rules of engagement. And so he made an assumption about what I could do without actually ever asking me. And so for me, it comes down to just ask. If you're curious about what I can do, ask. Tell me the parameters. I can then make a decision, but ask. And it comes to the same thing with, and I think it's the reason, if I'm being honest, why I spent so many years, 25 years of my life and my career working with young people, is because they just ask. They're like, hey, Ruth, what happened to your hand? Or hey, Miss Ruth, what happened to your hand? And then they walk away. They get the answer. Oh, you were born like that? Great. This is what's different about me. Adults often shush kids, but they also hush themselves and they don't ask. They stare, they double take. I've had people though ask me, hey, what happened to your hand? Or even crueler, I've had people say, oh, did you cut it off yourself? That's not curious. That's like, I've had people pray for me, Cords, like who say, I bless you and I hope that your hand is going to grow. It's not going to grow. Like that's reality. Well, I'll take the prayers of good faith. It's not. So I think people make assumptions a lot about those with difference. And rather than assuming, just ask, especially if it's coming from, and I guess only if it's coming from a good place, and be willing to then share your vulnerability too. Like if I'm going to answer, I've had people reach out and grab my hand. And I think it's that I don't know, by the way. I think it's a lot like what I imagine pregnant women go through when somebody puts their hand on their stomach and you're like, I don't know you. Like, why are you touching me? There's boundaries that get blurred with disability a lot. And so for me, it's about just asking when it comes from a place of curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, that to me feels like the most respect too.
Yeah. Because you don't make an assumption about what you think I can do. Don't make an assumption about what you think happened. Ask me. And be okay, I guess the other that would add on with the caveat, be okay if I'm not comfortable answering it too. I happen to be, but there are people with disabilities who may not want to talk about their disability or how it happened, or that they don't know how it happened. But be okay with either version and then let it go, right? That's the beauty of what we can learn from kids. They let it go.
That's great advice. And so help us understand. So you're now newly moved on. You're no longer a CEO, but now you're totally focused on this. And I think the key word is inclusion. Like, I really like that word, because I think that's where the polarization comes from around the topic, is that not all of these parts of the movement are about inclusion. Some of them are about exclusion, and other parts of privilege and all those other things. And I really like the idea around inclusion, because really that's where we form those common bonds. And I mean, and you can look out, into a crowd, and even if the crowd is homogeneous, where they all look the same, and I guarantee there's diversity in there.
Absolutely.
Of all types. And that perspective is incredibly important. So now tell us about what you're doing right now. So you're taking action, you're CEO, you don't mess around. What are you doing to help make sure that this is brought up as part of this this conversation?
Yeah, I am reaching out to all types of organizations, from corporations to nonprofits to higher education institutions, and starting the conversation about expanding diversity. So I go in and I keynote large audiences and small audiences with the idea of, let me share my journey with you. Let me talk about, from a personal perspective, from a lived experience, how I hid for 25 years my hand from everybody. Let me tell you that journey, the angst of hiding. Let me then share with you my journey of, and my path toward acceptance of how I understood my hand as a gift and my uniqueness. And that was through letting someone in. That was through finding a community of people. That was through sharing out my journey. And then let me tell you how I am still, in an authentic way, struggling at different points, because not every day is easy. And what's been amazing, Cords, is two pieces. One is actually three. One is the resonance that happens when people say, oh my God, me too. I have felt alone. I have felt like I was hiding. Thank you for sharing your story, because now I can share my story with you. The second is what you touched on a little bit earlier, which is, thank you for not giving me another lecture on diversity and inclusion and not having me feel included. Like, you've shared your story to help me feel included so that I can broaden and expand my definition of diversity. And the third is, thank you for admitting to still struggling, because I've had people come up who are on their own journeys around mental health, who say it's so powerful to realize that it's you look like you have it all together. And I do, but I still have days that are challenging. I still have times that I am like, could I just hide it? It would just be easier, because that's a part of the process, is how do you really show up as your full self? And I know that's a buzzword now, but how do you own those parts that are difficult on the road? And so my passion truly is getting people to start talking and sharing their stories and creating that space. I have a TEDx that I'm doing next week in Atlanta with the idea of, when I stopped hiding, I found freedom. So it's that idea of, and so many of us are hiding a part of ourselves, whether it's in the workplace or home. I mean, it can be everything from, and Deloitte did a study on this, by the way, where 61% of people admit to hiding parts of themselves in the workplace. And it is everything from hiding your race, to hiding your dialect, your voice, to hiding your education, to hiding your family background. People worry about that. And I've even heard more and more as I speak at companies, when I ask that question, what are you hiding? People talk about politics. They hide religion, but politics is a new one for me, because people are afraid of their voice and that people won't like them, they'll judge them, etc. And yet so many of us feel that we're alone in this hiding. And so how do we unhide and be
Yeah,
seen?
and some of the strongest communities I know about online are, based around those things that people are hiding.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of online too, right? Which is, you can find that shared experience. You can find that community, that sense. I mean, the internet, for all of its woes that we have, or too much time we spend sometimes going down rabbit holes of trying to find things. That's the beauty of the internet. I was lucky enough to be in a pharmacy a couple of years ago, and I met a woman who had one arm, and we started talking about our experiences, et cetera. And at the end of the conversation, she said, oh, well, do you know about the Lucky Finn Project? And I had not heard of it.
That's
I
a
kind of
great
had,
name. I love that
yeah, it's
movie.
based on Nemo
Right.
and his Lucky Finn. But in my head, when I was hearing that word, I thought of Lucky Charms, the cereal box, and I thought of Wounded Warrior Project. I was trying to put it all together. And I'm like, I don't know what this has to do with me. She said, no, it's a group of people with our limb difference. And I don't even know if I had called it a limb difference at that point. So I went home and I Googled it. And sure enough, at this point, there was a membership of, I think, 30,000 people. Today, it's over 60,000. And Cords, they had a picnic outside of Detroit.
Yeah, I love that.
Like, I got on a plane and I went to the picnic. And two amazing things happened is on my way there, first of all, I was scared to death because I'm like, I just started to make this my whole uniqueness and gift and all those pieces I shared with you. So I was thinking, wait, if I'm going to be around all these people who have my same limb difference, how am I going to be so unique anymore? But I got there, I was unique, but what wasn't unique was the shared experience. I wasn't the first person to ever hide my hand. That was amazing to realize, wait, I'm not alone here. There are other people who've done this routine too, who've hidden, who've lived their life afraid of judgment and shame. Wow. So that was cool to meet adults who had been on the same journey or similar journey.
Sure.
And second was, I also could be a role model to young people who were there and their families, because everybody, or I should say, many families and many parents worry about their children, right? When they're born, when they're growing up, are they going to be successful? Are they going to get a job? Are they going to be loved? Are they going to find partnership? And so to see me and others who were adults on this journey who are successful, that gave hope. And so it was the idea of being a role model to the young people and also learning from the young people, like, wow, you have an opportunity at this age to realize that there are other people like you. That's amazing. So I think that the power of the shared experience and community is huge. I mean, it's why groups like AA work, right? Because you have community, you have people that are connected, you have people who listen to your experience and also share their experience with you.
Yeah, and I think through, I think that's a powerful story. And I have a couple questions about it. I think, one of the things that I experience when I meet people who I share maybe it's like type of music, hobbies, it could be, we go to, and I know yours is way deeper than, like, for example, we love Boston Terriers. So we do meetups with other people with Boston Terriers. And it's just weird how, like, we a lot of times have things in common with other people who have Boston Terriers, but it's funny because it's like, we do notice that we all have Boston Terriers running around and they kind of act the same, the breed, right? But it's not long before we're talking about all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
That's that one common thing, but it doesn't take long. So when you're around the other people in the Lucky Finn, like, how often are you focused on the reason why you're there? And how much of your conversation is about other things?
I think the initial part is definitely the commonality, like, hey, this is what we have. But no, there's, such amazing connections. And to your point, so many other things that we share in common, so many other parts of our lives, because this isn't all of me, right? Like, this is a piece of me.
Tiny bitty.
Yeah. But for years, it took up a lot of brain space and thought it was all of me. And I definitely kept it separate. But yeah, no, I've had conversations about love. I've had conversations about workplace stuff. Like, do I show my boss? Do I not? Et cetera. And so it's definitely been, it's a convener, but it's not the only thing, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think all of our goal every day needs to be to learn something every day. I learn stuff every single day. You're talking about some of that personal growth, and I'm a different person every night when I go to bed by like 0.5%. I'm always trying to grow and to learn from others. So
yeah, that's the point about curiosity. I learned from someone recently, they said, every day, ask yourself 3 questions about why. Like, why? Just random why questions. Like, why do planes stay up in the air? Why does the elevator?
Bernoulli effect.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had to write that one down.
Sorry.
But, no, but what's
that's a question I've had. I wondered that too. So I looked it up. It's the Bernoulli effect.
Okay, I'm going to write that down. But the thing is then to see what are the patterns, right, within your why questions, to be like, why am I curious about this? But to be curious. Yeah. It's why I love travel. It's why I love theater, is to be curious, to get my mind working. And that's another piece of, I think, the people I want on my team is when your mind works, when you're curious, you're not just going by, this is how we did it last year. Okay, that's great. But how do we continue to build out?
I totally agree with you. You always have to be asking why 100% of the time. And
it's the beauty of 5-year-olds, right? That they ask why all the time.
I must still be 5 then.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think the beauty is get around 5-year-olds because they will ask you why to everything. Yeah. Why? Yeah. Why?
Completely. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to do the TEDx, and then what's next for you?
Ideally a book. That's what I'm working on. So a book around Right now it's a memoir of my story around the hiding and then the unhiding. And then it's a guide to workplaces on how to be more inclusive.
I'd like that. Well, we'll definitely have to check that out. Where else can people follow you or listen to some of this thought leadership?
Yep, absolutely. I think they can go to my website, which is my first and last name, ruthrathblott.com. And then honestly, Cords, where I love people to kind of see the conversations that I'm having in the thought leadership is on LinkedIn, because I just put a poll out. It was my first poll ever. Have you done polls on LinkedIn?
I haven't personally done a poll, no, but we do it for our team does them for clients all the time.
Okay, well, I did my first one after taking an amazing LinkedIn course, and I threw it up there because I had been getting some pushback around the idea of disability being part of diversity. And so I put a really simple question up, which is, should disability be part of the diversity conversation? Over 60,000 people viewed it, 2,500 responded. There were over 300 and something comments, and the dialogue is super interesting. And out of that group that responded, 97/98% said yes and gave me reasons. 2% said no, to that disability should not be part of the diversity conversation. And that is also curious to me, right? Why? And so that's where I'm engaging with people around this idea of how do we, again, expand the definition of diversity? And I'm curious about the reasons that people think it shouldn't be. Is it because there are other things that need to come first, which I'm starting to hear? But how do we then create space because I think there's enough space for it to be inclusive.
Yeah. And additional things, there might be even more things.
There absolutely are more things. And each person, just because you have a disability doesn't mean your experience is the same as someone else with a disability. But I do go back to, I think it's the great equalizer. And so, yeah, on LinkedIn, I think that's where the conversation is really interesting. And I spend a lot of time.
That's a great post. I'll have to check that post out. I'd love to read some of those comments.
Yeah, no.
And I recommend anybody who wants to learn more about Ruth to check out her website. That's ruthrathblott.com, just like it sounds. And you can follow us on the lawofrelevancy.com and anywhere where podcasts are found. Once again, my name is Cords Owen. I'm the CEO of Bake More Pies, a full-service advertising agency located here in Tampa Bay. And Ruth, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Cords. Thanks so much for the time.